Hey, Jake with B&H. Welcome to my humble abode, trying to adhere to the CDC guidelines of self-quarantine for the next 15 days. But that's not going to stop me from bringing you my C500 Mark II hands-on real-world review, which we're going to go through right now. Got to use this camera in a number of scenarios. Really fun shooting, documentary, a little more cinematic music video. First impressions, this camera is the best of both worlds, narrative and documentary. There's nothing you can't shoot with this. You can take this camera, put it in a bag, go out in the field, and you know that you're gonna be able to shoot something for Netflix, YouTube, or the film festival circuit. Let's hop into the real-world review of the documentary I was shooting. First thing I'm looking for is just performance of the camera and how smoothly it operates and how fast I can move. I'm shooting in the XF-ABC 10-bit codec, which is a full-frame scan, super sampled down to 4K. So even though it's a 5.9K sensor, I'm super sampling down to 4K because 5.9K is only RAW, and that's a lot of data for a documentary like this. I will try that in other scenarios, but for this, I'm sticking with the 4K XF-ABC. Off the bat, just the buttons light up, which is really nice. So if I turn this on, it boots up really quickly, and I have all the buttons: magnification, LUT on and off, peaking, zebra, waveform to check my exposure. I can quickly switch between slow and fast mode if I want to do some higher frame rate stuff. And it's been performing very, very well.
There's something I find really compelling about very meticulous, repetitive work. I've done a ton of crochet and all sorts of needle crafts. It's something I really respond to for some reason. I guess there's something meditative or rhythmic about it. For instance, for my punch needle portrait, I'm using this punch needle technique where you're just punching loops into a canvas, and I just use that to put down color as you would in a painting, but with the craft element. I'm using a punch needle, which is just like it's a little needle that punches the loops through the canvas. You know, I'm using portraiture and what I learned from art school in painting and color theory and applying it to that. So that's what I mean when there's so much overlap. It's just picking from my experience to create new combinations.
Can you see how dusty my screen is? I hope not. Okay, I got my notes in front of me. Just a few things I want to kind of go over, my first impressions that I wrote down after using the camera. Card slots select. So there's 3 card slots. There's 2 CFast card selections and 1 SD card slot. Now the CFast cards obviously are for the CFast Express media. The SD card slot is for basically proxy recording. So this camera does record 5.9K RAW light. If you watched our initial first look a couple months ago, you know all the codecs. 5.9K is the RAW. You can only shoot RAW at 5.9K. And if you want to shoot XF-ABC, their workhorse, more workable, faster codec, then you can do 4K as well as 2K and HD. A lot of different options there. Back to the card slot select. The fact that you can quickly choose your slot select on the side is really cool because it allows you to really organize your footage for post-production. Say I want to shoot, and there are only certain number of shots I want to shoot RAW. And then there's other shots that I'll just shoot XF-ABC 4K. I can set my larger card. So I had a 512 gigabyte card, CFast Express card in slot A, and I had a 128 gigabyte CFast Express in slot B. So when I was shooting RAW, I would switch to slot A and be like, all right, I want to get these certain shots. And they're huge files, massive files. So I have more time on a 512 card. Now, the other shots I don't really need, they're like beauty shots, you know, like typical B-roll shots I would use for my job. Then I would just switch to slot B. And now I'm shooting in XF-ABC 4K, much more compressed codec, but still really good. 128 is going to be fine for that. And of course I had the SD card in the slot for proxy recording. So when I go to edit, I know exactly where my RAW files are and where my XF-ABC files are, and I know exactly where my proxy files are. In terms of ergonomics, it feels exactly like the C300 in a lot of ways. Very similar where the buttons are, the battery, the card slots are on the side now rather than on the back. But everything else, it was very comfortable and familiar to shoot with. On the documentary, we used a variety of lenses. I used a Cine 50mm for the interview. We used a 7200 telephoto for some close-up shots. We used the 100mm macro for some real intense close-up shots of the needle threading that she was doing. We also used 16-35. Now 16-35 on a full-frame sensor. Granted, I was shooting 4K XAVC, so it was a Super 35 crop. But still, 16mm or Super 35 crop on a full-frame sensor is gorgeous. You literally see everything. No in-body stabilization, but there is digital image stabilization in the camera. I did use that throughout the handheld shooting of the documentary. But I really used it a lot in the taiko drumming shoot. I was walking all around that studio in Red Hook with the 16-35 on there because, you know, it just looks better. I think handheld with a stabilizer and a wide-angle lens tends to look more stable than, you know, a longer lens. You're going to see that shake because of the compression of space. So I just prefer shooting a much wider focal length when I'm doing any kind of handheld movement. I think a great example of that is in the documentary when I'm following Camille through the hallway, and it's all handheld with the EIS on there. I did not put any warp stabilizer on there. So yeah, I'm very impressed with it. It's super capable for, you know, if you didn't have a gimbal or motion stabilizer on hand, you could easily flick that switch on and get the stabilization you need for your documentary. There is internal ND filters as well in the camera, 3 stages that you can also go in and change different stops. You can change the amount of ND you want there. I think you can even double up if need be. I didn't find myself in that situation. I think in the initial testing when I went out with it, you'll see a couple times where I flick the ND on. It makes a huge difference, you know, shooting mirrorless and having to buy variable ND filters and having to, you know, screw it on, get the right filter, and sometimes they don't fit. You gotta get a step-up ring. Having built-in ND filters is just a professional way to go. Now let's talk about slow and fast motion. Coming from the C500 original, there wasn't a whole lot of variety of frame rates to play with, so seeing slow and fast motion in the C500 Mark II was a real surprise and a real delight. There are 3 modes you can shoot in. There's 23.98, 29.97, and 59.97. You can change those modes, and that is the frame rate that you'll be shooting in. If you wanted to go higher, you can switch to slow and fast mode, and you can go up to 120 frames in a 2K crop. So it's a Super 16mm crop, and you're shooting at 120 frames per second. I tried that. Not my favorite. You are cropping quite a bit, so you're losing some detail. It doesn't look fantastic in my opinion. However, 4K at 60 looks fantastic. And really, I think that's all you need. Sometimes 120 is just too slow. It's like watching paint dry. I don't know if you really need it. 60 is usually good enough. Just slow down that moment and give it a little more emotional impact. I should say that when you are in slow and fast mode, you do lose dual pixel autofocus. Now, to get around it, you can switch to the 59.97 Hertz mode, which puts you at 60 frames per second. And then you just have to slow it down in post-production. But that way you maintain your dual pixel autofocus. So I got the 70-200. I have the AF engaged, and I'm using the dual pixel autofocus. I turned the AF tracking off. I just want to be able to touch and decide where I want the frame to be. The touch screen is really nice. It grabs her really quickly, so I'm capturing her profile. And if I tilt down to see her punching through the fabric, it grabs it automatically without me having to touch the lens. Boom, there it goes. It goes right back there. I don't have to touch the lens. It's catching really quickly. It allows me to work a lot faster. Okay, I just want to provide some context to the drummer. So we were shooting a music video for a different product, and I thought, what a great way to showcase a different way of using the camera. The documentary was really to showcase the XFABC and the performance of the body, the ergonomics, to really see if I could use it in a documentary, quick-moving scenario. Whereas the Tyco Drummers was more like, okay, let's put this thing in RAW, 6K raw light, and just see what the dynamic range has and see what we can do with it. And I think I had it around 2500 ISO most of the day. You know, shooting in RAW, walking around with a 16 to 35 and a 70 to 200. I kind of just played around to get a variety of shots and really just wanted to bring the RAW files into Premiere and see what kind of grading I could do. And I was really impressed with the dynamic range, you know, highlights, shadows, everything was there, all the details were there, and I could really play with my levels. All in all, it is a phenomenal camera. I mean, you could easily make this your #1 camera for your production company, or if you're an owner-operator, if you're renting for a short film or a documentary you're trying to produce. It'd be really competitive and get a really, really good-looking image that audiences are going to respond to. I'm a fan. Thank you for joining me in my bedroom. Are you a fan of the camera? What are you going to use it on next? What's your next shoot that you want to use this camera on? Let me know in the comments below. This is Jake with B&H. Just keep rolling.